this video I will teach you the Sicilian Defense Dragon Variation. Before the game begins, there's peacetime. The soldiers are in the barracks and the horses in the stables. But when the war begins, we must deploy the army. Every single soldier has a place, has a duty, has a role to play. We cannot afford to only use our favorite pieces. You see, we are not playing with toys. We are orchestrating a war. So you are playing black and you are facing e4, and you will play c5, the Sicilian defense, and you will be looking to get into the dragon variation. What is the point of c5? Who is this little guy? Well, he is Charlie, the c-pawn, and if you don't know the names of the pawns, they are Ari, Barry, Charlie, Derek, Eric, Freddie, Garry, and of course Harry, the h-pawn. And Charlie has the simplest job of all. He's a kamikaze pilot, and what he wants is he wants to make sure that as soon as white puts a pawn on d4, he can jump in and capture it, almost always sacrificing his own life for the greater good. That's all this guy is doing. He's looking at d4. I'm going to show the first three moves for white, and then I'll concentrate more on the role and the roles and the job description of the black pieces. And then when we have that down, I will show some different variations about like what white can hit you with. White is almost always going to play knight to f3, and then you play Derek to d6. And it looks like Derek is looking out for Charlie, but he is not. Charlie, his fate has been written, and he is not going, we are not going to save this guy. He's going to blow himself up on d4. No, Derek has a different role, a different purpose in life. Derek is defending against the push e4 to e5, because we want to put a knight on f6 and we don't want it to get chased away. So d6 protects e5. And here we see d4, the most popular move. We know what the role of Charlie is, so he kamikazes himself and white recaptures. And I played white's moves here just because 95 out of 100 games in the Sicilian, they start like this. And then I'm going to hold back on white's move a little bit and just focus on what black is doing. So you have two knights. You have the aggressive knight and you have the defensive knight. And you start out by playing the defensive knight out. This guy is looking at e4. So he is looking at the center. He is also helping out, protecting the king, because you want the king to castle on the king side. Then there is a particular formation that you want to make on the king side, and that starts with g6, pawn to g6. Now Freddie, Garry and Harry, they have built a bunker. They are the engineer pawns and they have built a bunker. This is a bunker where you can put your bishop in the fianchetto position along the longest diagonal. So who is this guy? This guy his short name is the one-eyed bishop. And he's one-eyed because he's looking at only this diagonal. And his long name is the one-eyed super monster sniper bishop. That's his long name, because this is the whole point of the opening. This is the dragon bishop, and this guy can become immensely strong. Your whole strategy is about making this guy a very, very effective piece. Then you want to castle to the king side. So you can see your king is nicely defended in the bunker behind the engineer pawns. They have constructed this nice fortress on the light squares. So the pawns are taking care of the defense on the light squares. The one-eyed super monster sniper bishop looks at the dark squares and helps out with the dark squares. And finally you have the defensive knight. It has many roles to play because it's very versatile. One thing is that it is looking at h7. So just a quick recap, you have Derek guarding against e5 so that your knight will not be pushed away, and you will have a safe place for your king that also acts like a sniper bunker for your super monstrous sniper bishop here. Then you play out your aggressive knight. You have the defensive knight and the aggressive knight. This knight is going to look to find a way to attack white's pieces. And you have, of course, a one-eyed bishop, and you also have the two-eyed bishop. I'm going to put that on e7. This guy has two eyes, one looking at the queen side on this diagonal, and the other looking at the king side on this diagonal. This guy is a versatile problem solver. If white is attacking you over here, you can see how this bishop is nicely attacking all these light squares. So this guy is very versatile. Then you have your cannon. This is the rook that you put on c8. The a rook you put on c8. This is a cannon and it is looking down the c file. And you can see one of the reasons that we are very happy to exchange off Charlie the c-pawn, the kamikaze pawn, is that now the rook has a clear line of sight, and whenever you want, you can move this knight out of the way, and the rook will bear down on this file here. So when you have played all of these moves, white will of course also have done some stuff. And based on that, it's time for you to decide where you need your queen, the most powerful piece. And the queen uses this diagonal out here to find out where she wants to be. That is her entry into the battlefield. She can either go to c7 and have a look, form a battery with the rook and have a look down the c file, also potentially looking towards the king side on this diagonal. She can go to b6, where she's attacking the center, she's attacking b2, or she can go out to a5. Sometimes she'll be able to get a check in here, and from a5 she will attack down the a file. Also, she will attack this whole rank, and sometimes when you need, if like let's say white has castled kingside, you will actually need the queen to go to a4 and actually come all the way over to h4. So that's one of the mechanisms, that's one of the maneuvers you can do with your queen. And the last thing that you will be looking for is Derek. Derek is an ambitious guy. So he started from the bottom and now he's there, but he wants to go further. So if you get in a position where you can see, like here, you have e5 under control, so maybe you don't need him because maybe you have the knight to back up, then you will be looking for a way to play him one square further to d5. This is a bit more advanced than the level that this opening video is kind of aiming at, but you should have in the back of your head somewhere that he starts from the bottom, but he wants to go to the top. That is a strategic break that will often benefit you. So we will do a quick recap, and then I will first show you some cheap tricks that white on the beginner level will often throw at you, like the Scholar's Mate, and I will show you how the Sicilian Dragon easily deals with that. And then we will go into the main line so you can see what white is going to throw at you if they know their stuff, and you will know what to do against it. So against e4, only works against e4, you play c5, knight f3 and d6. This guy is a kamikaze pilot. This guy, he starts from the bottom defending e5, but he wants to go to the top. d4, kamikaze pilot has one job in life, is to exchange himself off. Now we play the defensive knight, and you can see how Derek is defending against e5, so we can easily put him here. We pause white's development and say, okay, we have the engineer pawns. We make the triangle the fianchetto position, where we can put the one-eyed bishop and castle our king. Now the king is very safe and secure. We then put out the aggressive knight towards the center. We put out the two-eyed bishop looking at both sides of the board, and we put out the cannon, the rook. And then we find out where we want to put the queen. Just a quick word about the last rook. The last rook is your backup cannon. Sometimes you will even double the rooks on the c-file, like this. But in general, this rook is your backup cannon. That is the last piece that you develop. Okay, so how do you defend against the cheap tricks? And defending against the cheap tricks is very, very easy. All you have to remember is, if they try the cheap tricks, you simply play e6. And let me show you what we mean with this. So they are going to play e4, c5, and then maybe they go for the Scholar's Mate on f7 with the queen to h5. This attacks f7. It also attacks c5. But if they try the cheap tricks, you simply play e6. And pawn to e6 here is just laughing at white. Now the plan of going here to c4 with the bishop, trying for an easy checkmate on f7, it's not going to work because the e6 pawn blocks the bishop, and also when you play e6, the bishop is defending c5, so there's no queen takes c5. But what if white is a bit more subtle with the cheap trick and delays it a little bit, just e4, c5. And maybe now they play bishop c4. At this point you're not sure if they are going for the cheap trick on f7 or if they are just putting the pieces out in sort of an unconventional but still solid way. So you still play d6. You stick to the plan. And here if they play queen f3, looking to wreak some havoc on f7, or queen h4, well, you still just play pawn to e6. The only downside for you is that you are getting a structure that's a bit different from what you have been practicing, but this setup is laughing really at these two pieces, and the advantage you get from playing in this way is worth the cost of getting a slightly different setup to what you usually play. Just imagine when you play out, for instance, the knight, which you're going to play soon, looking that's hitting the queen, you're going to win tempos, you're going to get ahead in development. The last cheap trick that they will quite often go for at the beginner level is knight f3, d6, you stick to plan, and instead of playing d4, they go bishop c4, you stick to your development plan, plays the defensive knight out, getting ready to the fianchetto position, and they try the cheap trick with knight g4, again looking at f7, and it's the same again. You just play e6 and you have a nice advantage. Now let's look at some more serious tries for white. e4 and c5. Knight f3, by far the main move, and d6, getting ready to play knight f6 with defending e5. d4. When they play d4, it's called an open Sicilian, because the game opens up. Many opponents may try a closed system, where they don't play d4, and if they just play d3, you should be quite happy. They are not being as aggressive, and you will get your setup going. You will have all your soldiers in the right places, and you will probably not be attacked too soon, so you will be able to mobilize your forces and mount a counterattack. Last little thing is that they can also try to play c3 with the idea of playing d4 protected, so that when you take, they take, and they will have established a pawn in the center. And you could say, well, then that's a loss for me, because my whole idea was to not allow them to have a pawn in the center, but this is completely fine. This pawn can be attacked. There are no pawns to defend it, so you can attack it like so, and this is generally not a problem for you. So d4, the main move, the kamikaze Charlie pawn, chops that right off. And here you put out your defensive knight. It's kind of funny because the first thing the defensive knight is doing is, of course, aggressive. It's looking at e4. 9 times out of 10, white defends with the knight. Do you remember what to do? The engineers get ready. They build the fortress, the triangle, the bunker. And here the most popular move is bishop to e3. white, and you will see this, has a strategic idea that white wants to put the queen on d2 to form a battery along this diagonal, so that the bishop can go to h6, where it will be able to exchange itself off for your most valuable piece, the one-eyed super monster sniper bishop. So sometimes black has a interesting defensive maneuver with this knight, where you can go to g4 and exchange yourself off for this bishop. But you should note that you cannot do this too early, because a lot of people, they learn all about this opening and they say it will be super smart if I got this bishop, I can play the knight here, it's defended by my two-eyed bishop, but it doesn't work because there's a trick. Bishop b5, it's check, whatever you do, you put something in the way, then I can actually just capture here, and you're in big trouble. The bishop cannot capture the queen because it's pinned. So the knight maneuver to g4, trying to pick up this bishop, is it's a very good strategic idea for black, but don't try to do it too early. Instead, just play bishop g7, get the one-eyed bishop in action, and here we go into the most popular and aggressive way to play this for white, which is known as the Yugoslav Attack. And here you play, or white plays rather, f3, pawn to f3. And when they play this, you should have a pretty good idea about what white wants to do. This pawn does a lot of things. For instance, it takes care of g4, so that you won't have knight to g4 to exchange off for this bishop. That's one thing. It also helps play g4, which will help play h4, and then you can make a pawn storm against the king. That is what white wants to do. Play a pawn storm against your king, and in the words of world champion Bobby Fischer, when you play against the Sicilian Dragon, what you want to do is open the H file, and then just sacrifice, and checkmate. So that is what white is trying to do. Open up this file and attack you with everything they have. That also means that when you see f3, which is by far the most popular move, you can be like 95% sure that white is going to castle queen side. And that's actually kind of good for you if you know what you're doing, because you remember the cannon, it's going to look directly at the king. Black just castles. This is the exact move order that black will be playing in 8 out of 10 games. Even when hit with a very aggressive setup like the Yugoslav Attack for white, we can still play the same strategy. We see queen d2, very thematic. You have to know what this move is about when you play the dragon. This move is supporting this bishop, so that this bishop can go to h6, so it can exchange itself off for the extremely important one-eyed super sniper monster bishop. Queen to d2 also makes room for long castle to the king side. Now it's time for the aggressive knight. Knight to c6. And white will finish their development. The most popular move is bishop to c4. This is known as the Fischer bishop, It's very aggressive. It's looking at the king. Also, you will quite often see, especially with sophisticated players that really know what they're doing, you will also often see bishop to e2. And that could look weird, but what it's doing is that when white pushes these pawns forward, they will be chopped off and they will be supported by the bishop along this diagonal. They move their aggressive bishop. Black sticks to the plan, puts out the two-eyed bishop. White castles, and we have rook to c8. So, if you made it this far, thanks for staying with me. And now you have a pretty good idea about how to get going with the dragon. Now I'm going to quite quickly show you an example game. In the game we see with Anand with the white pieces. He's a 5-time world champion and a chess legend. And he's facing Garry Kasparov, who, to my mind, is the chess legend. The game is from their 1995 World Championship match. And there is a small wrinkle because Kasparov had not yet played the rook to c8. He did a small move order skirmish first. That is very instructive because it shows one of the many uses of this aggressive knight. He plays knight to e5. This attacks the bishop. White, of course, needs this bishop, so the bishop drops back to b3. And now Kasparov plays rook to c8. Anand starts the thematic attack, plays h4. He wants to open the h-file and start a ferocious attack against the king. The way you defend against this is playing h5 to stop this pawn. Now the plan is to play g4 for white. And you can see how a bishop on e2 would help this out. Anand plays a safety move. He plays king to b1. Now we see the point of the knight being here on e5. It can go to c4. Okay, you remember how we were interested in trying to exchange this knight off for this bishop, possibly by coming on g4 earlier. This has the same idea. It forks the queen and the bishop, and of course white really needs this bishop to exchange for this bishop, because otherwise you can see the sniper just looking. There's a red dot on the fortress here, and you also need to get rid of this bishop because it also has tremendous defensive capabilities. So if you want to attack the black king, you need to get rid of that bishop. That means that we have to chop this knight off with the bishop. Bishop takes knight. And the rook, the cannon fires, captures the bishop. So now Kasparov has gotten rid of a very dangerous piece, looking at his king, and he's getting active with his rook. And here I'm just going to go over the moves with not that many comments. And here I'm just going to go over the moves with not that many comments. We see knight on d2, e2. And Kasparov starts his own attack against the king. You use the pawns to chip away at the walls of the castle so that you can get access to the opponent's majesty. Bishop h6. we've talked about this. There should be no surprise to you that this is something that white really wants. And the queen darts out. This is one of the aggressive squares it can go to. The bishops are traded. And knight f4. Time for the backup cannon. Rook on f to c8. This pressure along the file can be very dangerous, so knight to d5 in order to exchange the queens. Kasparov is fine with this. You can still have a good attack without queens. Queen takes queen. Rook takes queen. And now we have to deal with this pawn that is attacked by the knight. First we chop it off with the defensive knight. Knight recaptures, and king f8 protects the pawn. Rook e1, rook b8, and b3 hitting the rook. Rook retreats. Knight f4, and Kasparov changes his mind. Rook back to c8. King comes up. Kasparov pushes a5. He's really being aggressive now. So a3 ready to meet the attack. King no longer needed to defend here. Improves to g7. Knight d5. Attacking again now that it's no longer protected, and a cold-blooded move by Kasparov. Bishop e6, attacking the knight, saying you can take my pawn, but my bishop is now deadly towards your king. And here we see the power of the dragon, but also the power of the genius of Garry Kasparov. Because look at what Anand does. He does something really nice. He plays b4, attacking the rook. Takes, takes. The rook is attacked. It goes to c4. Anand had calculated all this, of course. 5-time world champion and chess legend. He is not to be trifled with. And he saw, okay, now I can play knight b6, forking the rook, and the other rook I'm going to win an exchange, and I will be very happy, probably winning. He had, of course, also calculated that rook takes pawn with check. Could be a problem, but he saw, okay, I play king a3, attacking the rook. Both rooks are attacked. There's no way to get out with check like rook a4 check, because I just capture with the knight. So either this rook will fall or this rook will fall. And here Kasparov played rook takes pawn. And Anand resigned. And the problem is he has no good moves. Because let's say he takes the rook. Rook takes rook. Then Kasparov can play rook b3 check. There's only one legal move. King a2. And now just rook e3. Check from the bishop. King goes somewhere. And we pick up the other rook. Black is now up with a nice passed pawn. And another protected pawn. So up 2 pawns. And this is, for the best players in the world, this is a trivial win for black. So this is the position where Anand resigned. And just quickly, you also cannot take the other rook. because then this rook hangs. And you could of course say that, well, I get the pawn, but black also gets a pawn. The rook takes g2, and now the base of white's pawn structure is ruined. So not only is white down 2 pawns, but his pawns are also terrible. Again, a trivial win for a guy like Kasparov, even playing somebody as great as Anand. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want me to do more of this stuff, please let me know and post questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.